Hi, I'm Dan, this is At Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is the Honda CBR650R, and perhaps my next step in this journey of discovery into this new category of sort of sports bikes like the Triumph Daytona 660 and the Suzuki GSX-8R you may have seen me riding on the channel previously. There's added spice with this particular bike because it comes fitted with Honda's new e-clutch system, and it's also the first inline four-cylinder engine bike that I've ever ridden, so kind of two rookie motorcycling milestones in one in that sense. But what do I mean by sort of sports bikes? Well, I've talked about it a bit before, but the Honda, the Triumph, the Suzuki and others like them, like the Yamaha R7 and the Kawasaki Ninja 650, they all represent this kind of rebirth of a style of bike that many people thought was dying out completely. And what's interesting about them is they all do it based around a very similar template. There's a new sense of affordability based on the fact that they're all built around steel frames. They all cost about £9,000, give or take. They have slightly less extreme riding positions and characters than perhaps traditional super sports bikes that we might have known from the past. And the fact that they all have, well, less than 100 horsepower makes them seem perhaps a little less scary than those previous sports bikes and perhaps a little bit more accessible. It also means they can be run in A2 licence trim, which means if you're a younger rider on a restricted licence still, it opens up a whole format of sports bikes that might not have been available to you in the past. And given that motorcycling is struggling to attract younger riders, that can only be a good thing. The fact that at a glance, this CBR650R could be mistaken for a proper supersports bike like the CBR600RR is no bad thing either, and I mean that as a compliment to the way this bike looks. Now, at this stage, it would be tempting to go into a kind of like a big spec sheet, deep dive, comparing all the kind of little nuggety details between all the different bikes, but that would just involve reeling off a load of numbers and be really quite boring. So I put all that into the video description below for you to digest at your leisure. Suffice to say, the Honda with its 94 horsepower is kind of near the top of the class in terms of power output, and on a similar level to the Triumph, which costs about the same sort of money. At £8,599, the Honda also undercuts the Suzuki and the Yamaha by a fraction, and that four-cylinder engine really gives it, you know, a real kind of USP in a class that's dominated by, you know, your standard parallel twins. Only really the Triumph with its triple has anything to counter the Honda's engine in terms of charisma. And what about the e-clutch system? Well, I think that's probably better demonstrated than talked about, but it only adds £130 or so to the price of the bike and only another 2 kilos. And when you combine that and the four-cylinder engine, the Honda has a level of kind of mechanical intrigue that really stands apart in the class. The fact that it looks like a baby Fireblade doesn't do any harm either, does it? Anyway, plenty to talk about, but let's do that out on the road. Right, so welcome to this ride on the Honda CBR650R, and while I usually start my onboard, you know, with a bit of nice inspirational open road, I thought it made sense in this case to show you a bit of kind of low speed stuff and just how the e-clutch actually works in kind of everyday situations and how it differs from any other system. So here we are on the bike in neutral, fire it up, and here's the kind of leap of faith bit, because as long as you've got that little green light there indicating the e-clutch system is on, all you have to do, don't touch the clutch, you can feel it's a bit floppy there because the e-clutch system's engaged, just select first gear and that's it. So like I say, it does take a bit of a leap of faith because everything in your head's telling you to pull the clutch lever, but you don't have to, and then all you have to do is just twist the throttle and you're away. So it's basically like a twist and go scooter, just one with a rather nice high revving four-cylinder engine. And then to shift up, just tickle the upshifter with your foot as you would with a quick shifter. And one of the interesting things in a situation like this, so downshift, and where you might kind of instinctively be for the neutrals there, where you might instinctively be kind of feathering the clutch. The system seems to do a pretty good job of disengaging in a kind of predictable way, just as you would if you were riding with a manual gearbox. So kind of my worry was that in kind of, you know, town situations, filtering and things like that, where you kind of live on the clutch a bit, just kind of riding it a little bit, that the e-clutch wouldn't be as smart, but seemingly it is. So for kind of low speed stuff, it seems very natural. You get used to it very quickly, although, as I say, keeping your hands off that clutch lever does take a bit of mental strength. It's still there and you want to use it, but you don't have to. You can do. So if you do want to feather the clutch, say you're filtering or something like that, you can still do that, and then it very quickly reverts back to the e-clutch mode. And as you can see, as the roads open up, it just basically operates like a really fancy quickshifter. So and the shifts are really smooth, so a lot smoother than they would be if you were using a quickshifter. So if you're a kind of quickshifter fan and you like the tech, it's really effective. But we're on a nice twisty road, sun's out, we're on a kind of sporty bike, and maybe we want to do the gear shift ourselves. Well, what do we do then? So you go into setup menu like this. You have to be in neutral. It's in there somewhere. There we go. Neutral, e-clutch mode, and when it goes black there, you can see it in the screen there. That means we're in full manual mode. And now we have full control in the normal way. Now, this bike does actually have a quick shifter on it as well. So, if you want to kind of mix and match the way you change gear, basically this bike has got every conceivable option. So it's got the e-clutch around town, it's got the full manual mode when you want it, and then if you do just want a quick shift, you can do that as well. So I think bravo to Honda for introducing a tech, but not doing so in a way that kind of detracts from the riding if you want to do it yourself. There we go. That is the e-clutch part of the bike. But what about the rest of the CBR650R, and how does it compare with the Triumph and the Suzuki that I've ridden previously? And what's it like riding a four-cylinder inline engine for the first time? Wow, pretty damn good, I will say. You know, the parallel twins that kind of dominate modern bikes are all very well, and the one in the Suzuki is probably one of the best. Actually feels a bit more like a V-twin, you know, it's got that kind of growly nature and all that kind of thing. But while the The triple on the Triumph has been lovely as well. It's got a lovely growl and a real smoothness. I've got to say, this 4-cylinder engine is, I think if you're comparing the bikes in the class like for like, such a strong feature. Just that noise and the smoothness and the revs. Oh, that sound is amazing. It's literally like nothing I've experienced before, because I've never ridden an inline 4 before, but based on this experience, I think I rather like them, and it does give the Honda a really strong selling point in the class, a unique one that really sets it apart from the competition. And the fact that it does that at a pretty keen price and with one of the strongest power outputs in the class as well, it's pretty convincing. And it's interesting that Honda still offers this alongside a proper super sports bike like the CBR650R. Now that's another 1,800 quid over the top of what you pay for one of these, and it's a much more serious bike. You know, aluminium frame, nearly 120 horsepower, 119 horsepower I think, and it's quite a lot lighter. It's 193 kilos as opposed to the 211 kilos of this E-clutch equipped 650, so a lighter and more serious bike, and a more expensive one as well. So, but it's great that Honda is among the few still building a proper super sports bike as well, and that option is there. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the sort of sports bikes, the pseudo sports bikes as I've called them. And how this compares with the ones I've already ridden. Just get around there. Well, it's interesting. I think the riding position, when I rode the Daytona 660, you could see that Triumph had pretty much benchmarked everything on the spec sheet against this Honda, so on paper they would seem like the nearest competitors, certainly in power, weight, all that kind of thing, price. And although it's a while since I've ridden the Triumph, I would say that the riding position on this Honda is maybe slightly less sports bikey, a little bit more upright. Still feels like a sports bike, and it still feels different if you're coming from a naked or something like that. But it's not a kind of bum up, chin down kind of super sports look bike. And I would perhaps even describe it as kind of potentially all day comfortable. Certainly on the Triumph, felt quite a lot lower down, and things like shoulder checks were just that little bit harder worked, crack your neck round. So the riding position on this is probably closer to the Suzuki, even though it's got sort of clip-ons actually cast into the yokes here, so they're not real clip-ons, but I think it's sporty enough and it lives up to the looks. And it certainly encourages you to enjoy the kind of sportier side of having an inline 4. And just, oh, the sound of that engine is just fantastic. I think I'm a fan of high revving 4-cylinder engines, which is absolutely no surprise whatsoever. So, in terms of the rest of the bike and how it compares with the others in the class, they're all really, really close in terms of their weights. The suspension components, pretty much all of them use these same Showa separate function big piston forks. They've all got comparable brakes. They've all got fairly basic suspension in that you can't do any adjustment beyond the usual kind of preload at the back. So again, they're kind of good for beginners in that respect, because if it's your first sports bike, you're probably not kind of confident to the stage where you're going to be fiddling about with compression and rebound damping and things like that. So I quite like the simplicity of the bikes, although they're steel framed. The weights are all pretty comparable, so a little bit over 200 kilos. The Yamaha is quite a lot lighter, I will say. That's 188 kilos, I think. So I've not ridden the Yamaha yet, but I'm suspecting it's kind of the raciest of the bunch. It's also got features like fully adjustable KYB suspension, things like that. So I'd be interested to try the Yamaha to see if it really is the sportiest of these new school sports bikes. So yeah, in terms of the bits on them, you're pretty much comparing like with like. So if you're in the fortunate position to be in the market for one, it's a case of picking the one whose character you like the best. And they've all got really strong personalities, even though on paper they all look very similar. So the triple in the Triumph is really charismatic. It's creamy, it's smooth, it's got torque and revs, perhaps a bit torquier than this Honda engine, I'd say. The Suzuki that I've ridden, I say that's got a real growl. For a parallel twin, it's a decently characterful engine. The handling on the Suzuki is really good fun as well. It's got really chuckable nature. It feels like a much smaller bike than it is. It looks good as well. So they're all kind of strong contenders. And it's a really nice category of bike because they look sporty. They are definitely a big step up in character from, you know, the kind of Nakeds or things like that people may be coming from, you know, the MTO 7s, the Hornets, those kind of bikes you might be upgrading from, but they've still got a sense of that friendliness, and that A2 license compatibility is a really strong selling point as well. You know, if you're a younger rider and you want a properly sporty looking, sporty feeling bike like this, then all of a sudden you've got an option that you didn't have before. And that applies to all the bikes in the class that I've ridden so far. But I think, as I said in the introduction, the fact that the Honda's got that 4-cylinder engine and the option of the E-clutch all of a sudden gives it a lot more clout, a lot more, as I said, mechanical intrigue. And that's the important thing with a motorbike, isn't it? You want to be curious about the technology. As motorcyclists, we're engaged with our machines, aren't we? We want to know what's going on, and we want to have a kind of a bit of an emotional bond, and that 4-cylinder engine definitely gives this bike that. An E-clutch it's just an interesting, it's a very Honda kind of way of doing things, isn't it? And an interesting addition to the bike's capabilities. Would I buy one with the E-clutch? I'm not sure, but it's an interesting feature and I've enjoyed trying it out. So yes, there is a quick flavour of the Honda CBR650R, and another demonstration that sports bikes are back. Different from how they were before, but a little friendlier, a little easier to use, and attractive to a much wider audience than before. So in that sense, it's all good news, whichever one you go for. And with that, I think I'm going to knuckle down and enjoy the rest of this road, if you don't mind. So there we go, a bit of a flavour of the Honda CBR650R with its E-clutch, and quite a lot to get my head around there. Two very new experiences in terms of my first inline 4-cylinder engine on a kind of sporty-ish bike, and of course that automated shifting with the E-clutch. I'll start with that. It's a really interesting feature, and obviously it's something a lot of manufacturers are introducing to their ranges now. You know, BMW and Yamaha are among them, and it kind of caters to a bit of a kind of, well, the industry is obviously keen to push new technologies at riders. Whether riders want them or not is something we'll get onto, but I think Honda's application of the technology seems to be, I think, inclusive is probably the word, isn't it? Because whereas on the Yamaha one it ditches the clutch lever entirely and you just either shift up and down with the foot shifter as you normally would, or with the buttons, and it does kind of alienate those who perhaps still like to shift manually. I'd count myself among them. Honda's system is kind of the best of all worlds really, isn't it? Because you've still got your clutch lever, you can still put it in full manual mode and it rides just like a normal bike, or when the mood takes you or the traffic conditions suit or whatever, you can just put it into the e-clutch setting and enjoy the convenience of not having to ride the clutch and all that kind of thing. And it seems very cleverly balanced, as I said in the intro, in those kind of traffic situations where you would normally be kind of riding the clutch a little bit. It seems to instinctively know what it's doing with that. I was really impressed. And the fact that it only adds 130 quid and 2 kilos to the bike, yeah, it's a little bit ugly, this kind of module on the side of the engine here, but apart from that, it's not really any sacrifice. It doesn't detract from the experience of riding the bike at all. You could leave it switched off and never use it and it would still be a fantastic motorbike. So yeah, I think I like the way they've gone about it and the options it gives you. In terms of the CBR650R and how it compares with the other kind of new school sports bikes, whatever it is we're calling them, that I've ridden so far, as I said on the onboard, it's interesting because they're all very similar in terms of their kind of mechanical makeup, the suspension parts, geometry, riding position, all that kind of stuff, and yet very different in their characters, and it's all about the engines really, isn't it? And Honda's 4-cylinder really stands out amongst the ones that I've ridden so far. They're all good, there's no bad bikes among them, so it would seem, but the fact that you get a kind of proper 4-cylinder screamer on this bike does set it apart. It's not as torquey as either the Suzuki or the Triumph, so you know, if you prefer a bit more flexibility, don't like chasing revs as much, they might be more to your tastes. It's a very different riding experience, certainly cranking it into kind of 5-figure rev ranges to kind of make decent progress, and it does require a bit more commitment, but I guess that's where it comes down to taste, and for me I quite like that in a sporty bike, so I've really enjoyed riding this Honda. Anyway, I hope that was interesting and useful. If you liked the video, please hit like, subscribe if you haven't already, and for now I'll say thanks for watching, goodbye, and ride safe.